very happy to welcome Professor James Oliver, who's been in India since 13th of March, and I've been meeting him every single day, and morning and afternoon and evening, and we have been on several adventures appreciating Indian culture, Indian street food, Indian people. And Professor James is an associate professor with the School of Design at RMIT University. He's also an adjunct associate professor with the Wamineka Jimbana Indigenous Research Lab at Monash University. He has more than 20 years of professional experience across a range of disciplines and sectors, including creative arts and design, arts development, public health, social sciences, and community and place-based practices. This was his formal little bit that he wrote. He wrote a little bit, which is so sweet of him. We all write more than a little bit, which Liam says, my son says, give me a little bit and some more, when he likes something, give me a little bit and some more.
A little bit and a lot.
A little bit and a lot. That's Tommy. Yeah. So I have been getting a glimpse into the life of Tommy. But James is from Scotland, the Scottish Highlands. And interestingly, even within the West that we understand, and one of the major economies, major military powers of the world is the United Kingdom, is Scotland, which has a slightly turbulent relationship with the crown. Okay? Should I say slightly or little more slightly? I don't know.
A little bit and a lot.
A little bit and a lot. Tommy knows it all. And interestingly, he went to a school on an island in the Scottish Highlands. The entire school had only 16 children. Entire school. I'm not talking about one classroom. So I was bragging about my child's classroom, which had 18 children, and James bragged a little bit more. He said, my entire school had only 18 children. So he comes from a land of a lot of nature, a lot of customs, a lot of traditions, a lot of folk tales, a lot of mythology, indigenous languages. So he comes from the United Kingdom, but he comes from Scotland with very, very rich indigenous perspective. And I hope we are going to hear a lot about that when he speaks about our human ecological and ethical relations. Professor James Oliver, RMIT Melbourne. Thank you, Professor James. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm a bit tired, so I'm sure through this process I will liven up. You're going to liven me up with me also. So I'm going to ask you a favor in a minute, and it will involve a bell. Chari, thank you, wherever you are, there you are, so much for hosting us. It's been a pleasure for Liam and me to be here. 2 weeks, the reason I'm tired is not because I've been running around the campus during lunch. It's because in 2 weeks we've been exposed to so much culture, so much conversation, so much culinary experience, so many cats, so many dogs, C's, all the C's. But it's just been a pleasure and kind of enlightening as well. And obviously the last few days we've met many of you, heard from many of you. We know there's a lot of knowledge in this room, so thank you all for that. Absolutely respect where you're all coming from. So on our journeys, we went to a couple of Hindu temples, and it was we were invited into some ritual, which was really lovely as well. So we were in some rituals, and in one of the rituals you hear a bell, and I asked Chari what it's about, and he described to me how it was alerting the god to attention, to life, to receive an offering. I'm not an expert. I trust I've translated that reasonably well enough. So I thought it would be nice to use this bell for one reason, to invite you into this space of offering, with me just now. Bit of participation, but mainly some thinking in a sort of ritualistic way to come together to think about where we're at and where we're going. The other interesting thing about the bell is, so I'm really excited, it's almost like a mini one of the school bell we had in that small primary school. It was so small that we were all allowed to actually ring the bell every play break. So you took it in turns to sort of bring people to attention back into the classroom, to be together. So similar, different. Also, Liam and I had a conversation whilst we were waiting patiently in Oroville. So we've been traveling around a lot: Pondicherry, Chennai, Oroville, Dubai, Delhi. And anyway, we had started talking about bells, and I was reminded of my mind started going, and I was thinking about the workshop we had here last week. I went with the students, and you have this fun thing when they're doing the presentations of having a timer, of course, just to sort of make everyone stop and make them not feel bad about stopping. What I want to say about that is that there's this very famous film in the West, you may have heard of it, from the 1940s, called A Wonderful Life. And so all about this man who's struggling with the forces of capitalism in his village in relation to the breakdown of family relations, effectively. And he can't handle it anymore. The pressure of trying to be a bank manager running a cooperative style bank in the face of, big banking coming in. So he decides he wants to end his life. He goes to a bridge and is about to jump off it. And then this man appears beside him called Clarence. Turns out Clarence is an angel. He doesn't know that at the time. And they're sitting around at one point not long after that, and the cafe door opens, as a bell often does, to command your attention to someone coming into space with you. And Clarence was super excited. And he said, every time a bell rings, an angel gets their wings. They've done enough work on this mortal coil to actually become a fully fledged angel. Now, I'm going to pass this to Chari, because in the spirit of the stories about the bells, feel free to ring that when you need to, because I'll know my work is enough done. I'll have got my wings. So, and I don't know when that's going to be. So I know that the schedule's gone a little bit all over the place, and it says 45 minutes. I just thought I'd do 5 slides. I've actually got 25, including an extra one I made whilst Mr. Ketchup, where is he still here?
No, Mr. Ketchup is there.
Oh, well, anyway, when Mr. Ketchup was here, sorry, apologies, he's got a real name and he's a real person, obviously. It made me think of this phrase from my language. Forget about it, that was just auto-generated somewhat serendipitously by PowerPoint. So this phrase, a vellum fer gorum, says, is the grass green? Somewhat luckily, it came up as a green slide. But if you put that into Google Translate, what you'll find is that it says, is the grass blue? But the phrase is correct. So I just wanted to use that as a bit of a sort of overarching sort of prompt for you, because the reason that it is described as that, because it's about the quality of the experience of seeing the grass, as opposed to an analytical, reductive, scientific definition of what that color might well be. It would be uenya is the Gaelic for green. But we say the grass is blue because of the quality of the experience of coming into a relationship with that grass in those conditions of light. Generally, it's because of the shiny quality. Similarly, a person or anything else could also be called blue because of that. So obviously we know why we're here. We're part of the Health Co-Design for Community Wellbeing conference. This is the title that Chari's already read. It's in the context of a workshop we did last week. If you weren't here yesterday, I said a little bit about that. Design is situational and relational. And added another bracket there because I think, as represented maybe a little bit by my Is the Grass Blue, Green quote, fundamentally it's also about this tension we live with in the world, the West, and beyond, between relational validity or instrumental validity. Instrumental maybe meaning overly analytical or over-determining, or economic. Usually relational validity is in relation to critiquing economic validity. So that's where we're going. I'm going to go in a bit of a circle to get there. I suspect I'm not necessarily telling you anything new. I think you already have the answers for some of the things I might be sort of suggesting or commenting on. So that's great. In the spirit of ritual, I'm also going to do an acknowledgement of country. This is what we do in Australia, where I live. That bottom part of the phrase is an acknowledgement of what we call an acknowledgement of country. So I will acknowledge the elders of the people of the Waiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups, on whose land I have my job, lands that were taken from them. Didn't invite anyone to come and take them. I think you're familiar with that story in this continent. And indeed, the island I'm from, exactly the same scenario. I don't mean Britain, I mean the Isle of Skye. And in terms of my place in Skye, it's Misha Shemis Chatrina, Nien Don Nuishvik, Machol, Machfeter, Machurichi. Now that's, in my culture, you don't have a name, you have it's Slonya, and it's partly about your 7 generations in this instance. But it's also, it connects you to a place, because it's known to people in a place what that would even mean in terms of that sort of set of relationships. So that goes back to about 1740, 1750. And my family has, continuously been fighting on that land to retain custodianship of it since that time. I'll come back to that. So, other thing I'm inspired by from this visit, the other day, I can't remember where it was, Chari, but you made a statement along these lines when we were in the car, maybe driving to Oroville or somewhere, about the changing understandings and situations of what it is to relate being a key concern for us all, probably in this conference, maybe more broadly as a society. We're in an epoch of great transformation. And earlier on in the symposium, we heard people talking about holistic health. And these things, that's not necessarily something that's a straightforward process to understand or articulate or give meaning to what holistic health means. So hopefully what I have got to say will in some way be meaningful. But this is where I want to do a little bit of a task. I think maybe the aircon might have already achieved a little bit of it for me in terms of waking us up a little bit. But as a visitor, now I'm going to kind of make you feel guilty. I'm going to ask you to do a participation, okay? In 2s or 3s, a little bit like Liam did the other day. And I'm going to get you to answer this question, but I'm going to get you to do it in a particular way. So I want everyone to have a piece of pen and paper to their hand. to be close to at least one other person, preferably no more than 3. So this circle is going to repeat itself in my presentation, and it's a holding space. It's you. Maybe me and what I'm saying is in the black box there. I can only articulate what I know, but there's also all that other stuff in the circle. So in terms of thinking about holistic health, bit of a framing there, a bit of a metaphor. So one of the things that I did for a long time when I worked in health settings is we ran improvisation workshops with various stakeholders, etc. So I'm going to get you to do one of those. It's not scary to think about. Does anyone here juggle? Can anyone juggle? Anyone brave? Yeah, juggle like that. If anyone can, though, you'll know that the first rule and lesson in juggling is that you learn to drop the ball. And that mistake is not wrong. So moving on from that, there's another game called Yes and. So I want you to each speak to each other in a fairly rapid way, take some notes, and one of you is going to be nominated to ask that question: what is our holistic well-being for health? And then the other person answers. Then the next person goes yes and offers another answer. And you're going to create a little list for yourselves, learning from each other, not just your own words, but what other people have said to you. And Chari, there's another reason for using that bell. 2 minutes. Okay? Get in a conversation with somebody. What is our holistic well-being for health? You got it there? And yes, and see how far you get. So ready, steady, go. Cool. That is an indication that you've all done enough, whether it was a little bit or a lot. Okay, so maybe you've established a little bit of a vocabulary for yourselves, maybe just words you already know, maybe things that have been brought to your attention by other people. So my next point is in relation to this here, that possibly, I mean, someone this morning was speaking about political economy, I think. Yeah, so this kind of relates to those sort of traditions of thinking or critiquing the world. All knowledge that we have, especially the formal, that sort of maybe intimate that they're objective and transcend other knowledges, are always from a situated position of power, of privilege, and other dynamics that go on. You can think of the domination of scientific modes of thinking over more artistic, equally valid ways of being in the world, of course. And then there's this other point about social embeddedness, or rather disembeddedness. We have these processes, systemic social structures, institutional structures that are very good at disembedding whatever the particularity of their interest is for exploitation, for money or whatever else exploitation might mean, away from their social context. I mean, a classic example is the idea of a free market. We know that all governments interfere in the free market. And we're all in places that are affected by this relationship of situated knowledges. Therefore, there's interactions and difference in relation to what we know and what other people know. How that might become more socially embedded in a valid way, a relationally valid way, as I described at the beginning, is maybe is of shared concern to us all. Whether it's about how certain care practices get more resourcing, or whether it's about challenging other kind of practices going on socially that are sort of adjacent to the core issues. I used your word. So here's another Gaelic segue. Botach Rockish. So Botach Rockish translates as the man crow, or the crow man. In English, the scarecrow. And there's a really interesting story, poem called Botach Rockish. And it's all about how this man in black, effectively he's a outside preacher, not from within the culture. And he comes in and the people are gathered around fire and they're telling stories, playing games, sharing knowledge. And the scarecrow, the Calvinist preacher, it's my tradition, so it's okay for me to critique it. The Calvinist comes in and he goes into the middle of the fire and he takes the coal from the fire, takes them one by one, and he removes them from the fire and he places them in the breast of every individual in the room. And there's no fire left. And the poem is sort of an analogy in relation to how certain forces have been at play, whether we call it civilizing or Christianizing, colonialism, things we're not allowed to talk about sometimes. And what was keeping the community alive, this fire, has gone from being a community shared concern and investment and been turned into an individual responsibility. And the community fire has gone out. So that's another way of thinking about this thing about situated knowledges and social embeddedness and disembeddedness. And the reason I want to, if you can't see the slide, really what I'm flagging is this question of community traumas that persist and exist in society across all nations that have this really catastrophic effect on individuals. So a little bit more about where I'm even coming from, because it's probably apparent I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not in primary care. I'm not, I have a PhD, but I wouldn't describe myself as a scientist. But I grew up in my culture of song and story and faith, I guess, and ritual in different ways. Then I went to get educated, and everyone wanted me to get educated to become a minister, a preacher. But that didn't happen because I went to university and all of a sudden I was exposed to another kind of world. But I did degrees in history and politics, then did masters in social science and philosophy of science. Then I did a PhD in anthropology. But since that time, I've actually just gone back into more community-based, culturally based research. And things that I've been involved in since sort of postdoc era. My PhD itself was about my own language in relation to people in place. But it obviously gave you generic skills to do research jobs. I worked with homelessness and well-being in Glasgow, which is, probably a relatively famous city, with a big issue. That was working with vendors. I basically went to work with vendors for 6 months and hung out and just learned about their situation. Wrote a report for the National Health Service. Another situation was creativity as openness, as I ended up calling it, which was another project with clown doctors who, I think there's another name for it here that you gave me the other day. Mediclown. Yeah, who are operating with in a young people's hospital setting. And yeah, about the safety that they were creating in a space for young people with quite severe issues in some cases. And then there's another project about positive mental health and policy development for the Arts Council in Scotland. And yeah, and there I guess is maybe the closest. I mean, my PhD used things like focus groups and interviews, but it was ethnographic, you wouldn't call it co-design necessarily. But maybe the closest I got into sort of design activity was with the Positive Mental Health Project, where we had to design this program and policy document for the government and the Arts Council in relation to encouraging people to participate in creative practices, arts practices for positive mental health reasons. Not to cure anything, it wasn't in a sort of deficit model, it was what's described as positive mental health. Yeah, what we did in that was I worked with theatre folk, and we did a lot of improvisation workshops as a mode of getting people's investment and knowledge in relation to each other so that it could inform the sort of strategic advice we gave. So that, I mean, effectively that's co-design, working with people and also getting people to collaborate across sectors, across boundaries. They wouldn't necessarily be in the same room for any other reason. And I've already told you this, but yeah, but actually my research background is in Gaelic cultural revitalization and place-based belonging. And another connection with co-design, I think, I'm just getting you try and think about co-design. Why is that language, even on here? And also, what do we even mean by health and well-being and community? So apart from doing the improvisation workshops for planning, there's also this other thing I wanted to share, which is about, I guess, the situatedness of knowledge, about the specificity of how people relate to their own culture, regardless of all going to the same school, for example. And there's a word called Gianav, which is written there. And this is not unique to Gaelic, by the way, but it is different to English, where the word Gianav means both doing and making. It could be, you could use it for performing, for acting, for materially making, or for me just trying to bring you into something now. Scoot through this middle bit then maybe. So this is a project I'm working on just now back home in the Isle of Skye. It's in the Hebridean Islands, if you've ever heard of them, just west of Scotland, north of Ireland in the Atlantic there. And I've been working with an arts organization there and also with international people from other island and or minoritized, marginalized cultural places and people. And one of the sort of motivational factors for me is, yes, that previous Gaelic work about cultural revitalization, but also how people can get back into relation with the land, because the land has become so privatized and so commodified, and people have become so alienated from the land, and the land has just become pockets of trees, extra houses, no one living there, what sometimes we call gentrification, but it's just an extension of alienation processes that have been going on for 200 odd years, since the 1740s, when I mentioned at the end of that Slonye, because that person, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, I think it is, he came in as a refugee from a war in another part of Scotland at that time. So, so Tua is the name of the project. Place and land relations is about learning with land and place, as I've just suggested. in the context of what I call the global archipelago, and as what I also call a hyperlocal practice. Quickly, I'm just going to go through in the other slides some of these other words. Don't need to worry about them right now. But when I say hyperlocal, I'm talking about the relationship between particular places and a planetary reality. So that connects to the global archipelago sort of language. We all are on the same ocean, if we think about it that way, instead of in different lands. And that helps us often transcend boundaries and cultures to connect with people who are doing similar things in different places. Like we are all doing maybe similar different things in different places. Another way I describe it, because I'm an islander, is collaborating with islandness, but also try and challenge what people think that means. Like though an island it's just a piece of land, and it's in relation to many things, other places. The sea connects it to other places. It's in relation to the sea. It's in relation to different economies on the land and the sea. It's in relation to tourism. It's in relation to people, young people leaving for education, like me. And also coming back to the circle, I mean, a lot of people think of an island like this, as a bounded thing. But of course, if you look at that also, is exactly how we would represent the planet. So this sort of relationship between the particular and maybe not the universal, but certainly maybe wider sets of concerns and problems is really important. So hyperlocal practice is something that I think, a bit of jargon, but you know, a medical world's a little bit of jargon. The rest of us can have a bit of jargon. So I want to shift now to thinking about the well-being side of why I'm even talking. So there's this concept in Gaelic called duchas. Its etymology is related to old words for land, du, and or what we call country. Like in Australia, we talk about acknowledging country. We have a similar word, duich. But there's this other thing called duchas, which has been described variously as untranslatable into English without robbing the terms of their emotional energy. And the way I've described it is it's academic language, but I think it's important to just sit with. I've been asking you to think about other vocabularies and words. But duchas is that ontological dynamic of embodied experience and emplacement on the ground and a complex entanglement in the mind with relationships of belonging and dwelling, heritage and inheritance, a human ecology with place, including where relevant land. It is something like the ontological ethics of what the anthropologist and poet Renato Rizaldo refers to as the cultural force of emotions. This sense of belonging and responsibility, when conceived of as praxis, as emplaced ethical relations, is political, social, and cultural imagination in action. And what I'm suggesting today, it's also about emotional well-being. So there's this is where I grew up. It's a big glen to the right. There's the Atlantic and other islands. To the left, there's big mountains there. This land where the heather is here. I don't know if you can see, there's furrows in the land, but that's the traditional way of agriculture that is still left in the landscape. If you zoom out and Google, actually that's the most prominent thing you can see. And you can't see the houses because they're surrounded by plantations of trees and things like that. And the old croft system, what was, it's old now, but even at that time it was imposed in the 1800s, crofting system, and how the land was used is less visible than this much older form. And the project I work on over there is called, I mentioned earlier, it's called TUA. I'll come to that in a second, but it's in the village I lived in called Fasach, and Fasach translates as wilderness, but again, it's not a really great translation. Really what it is, it's a place of separating out the domestic from the non-domesticated. So place where human and non-human relations are possible, not sort of controlled with the environment of what's necessary for safe cultural and family practices. So the Fasach in reality is a place where you meet the other world, whether above or below the ground or beyond the cosmos. This is the land I grew up on. The bit that's cleared, not planted on, not fenced, but appears to be fenced because there's fences all around it and trees all around it, is the project. Yeah, to about there. The top part's owned by someone else who bought my grandfather's house and then surrounded it by trees, including some from Australia, eucalyptus in there, as there are around Delhi. So this project is basically an offer back to the community in a few ways. Partly I'm challenging people on the idea of what ownership means. Because what was a principle of shared and community ownership has been under and protected in law by that. My language and land is protected by law in many ways, different to normal private property. But it's been encroached on massively by that privatization, that individualization, that commodification to a particular way of not relating to land, to like planting trees in it, as a barrier almost to the rest of the world. And certainly it massively inhibits access, including to that river. So with that land, I'm interested in it being an invitation to people so that they can still access land, do things on it, and access that river. It's a very simple premise, but also it's this project of recommoning, making people, including the way people think. So every time somebody goes to work in it, like I have work with an artists organization I already said, and we do residency stuff on it. I've got collaborations with other artists in other islands around the world in the global archipelago, the hyperlocal stuff, who come and engage with it. And there's also, on the island itself, there is this thing called School of Plural Futures, which is for young people aged between 16 to 30, still quite young, who maybe have never left the island or have come back, and they're kind of just stuck in a bit of an in-between place of not really being necessarily having secure accommodation or work. It's a big issue, like that security of work or access to land, even on your own parents' land. Anyway, anyone who works with it has to acknowledge this question, and they have to also acknowledge people who have worked on it prior to them. They can't pretend work that's gone on before has not happened. There's an example of the School of Plural Futures doing some stuff. And connected to that, we also helped the local arts organization launch a new thing called Making Publics Press. So they set this up so that anyone on the island can create their own book and get it published on the island and be shared around neighboring areas. We did a launch issue called Gaeltacht Futures. Gaeltacht just means the culture region, the place of the Gael. And for example, here, this is Cass Iseji, who's of Nigerian descent, but is a native Gaelic speaker because of the schooling situation and colonialism. Other stuff there directly about Question Yerin is the language question, which looms massively. Obviously, it's important to me. You don't need to know all the details. And then that's me with this Shiraz Beju, who's from Mauritius, and small, similar size island to Skye, and has very similar issues with overdevelopment and quantification of space. So I'll go back the other way, but I'm nearly done, if that's of any concern to you. Yeah, there we go. So just coming back to that pondering from Chari about the changing understandings and situations that we're all experiencing of how we relate. Could be to each other, could be to place, could be to our profession. There's all these intersections where we struggle to deal with change in work or in society or in family. And it's of direct relation to, I think, I propose our holistic well-being for health. Tua means people in place. It's a word that means, literally a word that can be used to mean the land, the place, but also means the people because of that interconnectedness, that relation, that dukhas I mentioned earlier. Kaylee, you may have heard of that word. If you've gone to Scotland or Ireland even, similar thing exists. Kaylee is usually, you'd be exposed to it as a dance in a pub. There's session music, hilarity. It can be that. But really, the word Kaylee means to visit. So Kaylee is a core part of culture. You visit your friends, families, neighbors, and you share news, you share songs. That's how culture continues. That's how you build community. Practice of knowledge and sharing. But those things, when they come together, and they're not separate practices, practice of people in place, the practice of knowledge sharing, are also this other thing called kurum. Now, kurum just means ceremony also. And I think in many ways, you're all involved in practices of that. I've certainly heard examples of it. You're dealing with people in place often. You're having to contend with practices of how to share knowledge. And you need to think of ways of making that special. Like, how will people take it seriously? How will they be attentive to it? How will it be relevant? So how will they relate? So, yeah, I call this cultural force of relations, that doing and making and knowing and emotional well-being that generates, I would say, something we might call ceremony. I'll read, sorry. So I'm literally on my last slide. Can't talk about that without also acknowledging this book here, this work by a Cree scholar, Native American scholar, Sean Wilson, and he talks about the importance when you're thinking with Indigenous knowledge systems about these R's, the R's of research, as he calls them, and that is respect, reciprocity, relationality, relevance, and responsibility. And like where I'm ending is those things together, I think, offer a lot to well-being and emotional well-being for people. And I think those things together in co-design also offer that as a ceremony of how to come into relation with all sorts of different kind of questions one might have, and reasons for bringing people together. Yeah. What I was going to do was suggest you do that exercise again right now, but I think I've probably gone over time. So you can think about that and add to your words, create your vocabulary, or maybe you already have a complete one. I don't know. Thank you.